evening, everyone, and thank you for finding time amidst your busy schedule to join us for our virtual wine tasting. Well, today we have the honor to welcome our friends from the Napa Valley, the Quintessa Winery. Well, I was just sharing this information with Rebekah just a couple of minutes ago. Yeah, that I was pleasantly introduced to the wines of Quintessa one day when a bottle of 2017 vintage appeared in our office, alongside with the presentation booklet of Quintessa. And further, I decided to bring this bottle out for tasting with one of our themed dinners, and that is the first time I encountered the wines of Quintessa. Amazing wines, lovely, 100% Cabernet. And that was how I decided to learn a little bit more about the wines, understand a little bit more about the wines. And recently, just months ago, we have the opportunity to get acquainted with Diego. He's representing Quintessa Winery for the Asian market. We exchanged a couple of emails. We have a virtual session of webinar, and he tells us all about Quintessa and how he decided to relocate himself to this beautiful vineyard. And then after that couple of exchange, we decided to have a webinar to share this story with not just myself and my team, but with our friends in Singapore. So I think without further ado, I'd like to introduce Rebekah, the winemaker of Quintessa, and Diego, the ambassador of Quintessa. So for today's session, she will bring us through what's happening at the vineyard now and some area views of the winery, because it's really dark there now. It's 5 a.m. So she probably can't bring us to the winery. So Rebekah, why don't I hand the stage over to you and you can tell us all about Quintessa.
Well, thank you very much. And thank you everyone for coming to this virtual webinar and for sharing Quintessa with me. We've prepared a little presentation to explain what Quintessa is, where we come from, and why the wine tastes like it does, and then we can taste the wine together. I'm joined by Diego Garay, who's our export director. And so Diego is the man responsible for this. In fact, he's joined us from Chile, joined the Huneeus family, which is Quintessa Winery, a couple of years ago, and helped us start to share our wines all over the world. Quintessa is an iconic Napa Valley estate, but up until about 3 years ago, we had never been out into the greater world. And so this is really fun for me. I've been living and making wine in Napa for nearly 20 years now. But this is some of my first experiences of sharing our wine in the broader world. And I find that you have very, very interesting insights, and I'm really interested to hear what you think of these wines. We're sharing multiple vintages today and our white wine Illumination. In order to start, I have a little video to sort of set you where we are in Napa Valley, a drone video to kind of transport you into actually where I'm sitting right now. If I had any light and you could see it. So Emerson, are you able to share that?
Yes.
Do we have any audio?
Oh, no. So as you know, as you can see from here in that video, Quintessa has a lot of beauty to the estate. In fact, I find it to be almost like a lyrically beautiful property. I'm going to share a couple of slides and we can go over them, because I think that there's something very specific about Quintessa and about our estate and our terroir that translates directly into the wine. As you know, Quintessa is an estate in Napa Valley. We're located in Rutherford. So we are here at the heart of Napa Valley. Rutherford is right at the center of Napa Valley, and Quintessa is located on the eastern side of that. Here is a shot of Quintessa. Now we're looking to the north. You can see the lake on the center. The lake is our living, breathing organ and cleansing organ of the center of our property. It is one of the largest lakes, and it's actually a reservoir in Napa Valley. There's a few other vineyards in Napa Valley that might have lakes, but I don't know of any other one of this size. You can see in this picture some of the geography and geology of Napa Valley. Quintessa is really interesting, and it's going to be fun to share it with you, because I feel like Quintessa and our terroir is a microcosm of Napa Valley. Napa Valley is small. We're only 30 miles north to south and 5 miles across at our widest place. But we have a lot of variation in our terroir, in our geology, and variation in our microclimates, which lead to diversity in the types of wines that we make here. As you go north in Napa Valley, it gets warmer. So the southern Napa Valley is Carneros, northern Napa Valley is Calistoga, and Rutherford's right in the center. Rutherford and Oakville, which we're next to, are two of the most famous regions in Napa Valley for Bordeaux varieties. And that's because of the perfect location in the temperature differential in Napa Valley. So we get the fog in the morning. So this is a picture, actually, it's sort of right after that fog is burned off. Every morning we have foggy mornings, so we have very cold nights, and then we have warm days as the fog burns off. So we're able to ripen these red varieties, these Bordeaux varieties that have strong tannin, but maintain some fresh acidity because of those cold nights. Rutherford is right in that perfect center where we get just enough cold and just enough warmth to perfectly ripen Bordeaux varieties, but not get too ripe and too alcoholic and too jammy, or underripe and green, as you can have some in some other parts of Napa Valley. Napa Valley is a valley, of course, and we are bordered by two mountain ranges, and you can see them in this picture. On the far side, on the left-hand side in the distance, is the Mayacamas mountain range. And that's the mountain range that separates Napa from Sonoma. On the right-hand side, and Quintessa is nestled right onto this mountain range, is the Vaca mountain range. So this is the eastern mountain range of Napa Valley. Both of these are volcanic mountain ranges, or were volcanic mountain ranges. There's something really interesting about the geology of California and of Napa Valley, which directly relates to how our wines taste and how what is our terroir. And I'm going to go into that in a lot of detail later. But first, I just wanted to share and kind of set the scene for what Quintessa is with this absolutely beautiful estate. And I keep on using the term estate. Here in Napa, the concept of an estate is not that common. And what I mean by estate is that at Quintessa, the wine shares the same name as the estate. Quintessa is the name of the property. It's the name of the wine. The grapes are all grown on this estate. We make the wine here, and we are focused 100% on making just Quintessa and Illumination, our white wine. Augustine and Valeria Junais are our founders and still run the company today. And I'm going to quickly just talk a little bit about them because when I think about terroir and I think about a wine, I think it's a combination of geology, of soils, of climate, variety, but also of culture, of people. And Augustine and Valeria are absolutely amazing people who are responsible for discovering and founding the Quintessa property. Augustine and Valeria are originally from Chile and have worked in the wine industry since the 1960s. Augustine was well known for bringing Conciliatoro up to become the most exported Chilean wine in the 1970s. And then he moved to the United States, where he was a partner and president of Franciscan Wine Estates. So this is a picture from the 80s. He was running multiple wineries in Napa Valley. And he and his wife, Valeria, were looking for a project that they could utilize everything that they knew about wine and can create or be stewards of the land of a place that had a very distinctive voice. And one day Valeria was driving up and down Napa Valley and she found a flyer for a property that was called the Mardikian property. So this is in the 1980s when Napa Valley was booming. Valeria found this flyer for what had been somewhat abandoned property in Rutherford. It had never been planted to vines, never been farmed before. It had been a vacational place of a restaurateur from San Francisco, and had a couple of cows, and there were some legendary parties that had been on this property. So there was very good energy, but there was no vineyard. And Valeria discovered this property, walked onto it, and immediately felt that this is the place. That this is the place that could be a great wine estate of the world, that has the potential to create a distinctive wine, a distinctive terroir, and that had what she would call a soul, that the land itself has a voice, and that she needed to be able to guide that voice into being and to let other people hear it. And so in 1989, Augustine and Valeria Huneeus were able to acquire this property and begin planting Quintessa. And I just love this picture because this is when they were planting Quintessa and they were looking out over the lake. Over the block across from there is Dragon's Terrace. It's one of our core blocks, one of our patrimonial blocks. And they were thinking and believing that Quintessa has this kind of potential, that had something to say. And now 30 years later, here I am sharing the wine with you in Singapore. And, I think that it's pretty incredible to see it come around and to be part of something like this, and part of this incredible property, and to be able to help fulfill this vision, and to be working with this estate. As Valeria first discovered Quintessa, she fell in love with its beauty. And you can see it is comprised of rolling hills, that lake in the middle. We run from the Silverado Trail, which is the eastern road that goes up and down Napa Valley. And our western boundary is the Napa River. So we actually comprise two of the three major features of Napa Valley, which are the two mountain ranges and the Napa River. And it's got vineyards planted at all points of the compass. We have different elevations, but as we've worked with Quintessa, we found that it's even more beautiful, incredible, and diverse than we initially believed. It turns out that Quintessa is this unique spot in Napa Valley. It's on the valley floor, but it has these hillsides. So the first question is, why do we have hillsides here? And then why do we have such a diversity in the way the wine tastes that's growing from these different blocks? This is a 280-acre estate with 154 acres planted to vines. I have 26 different blocks, separate blocks on the property, and I will make up to 85 separate picking sections of the vineyard. So it's kind of just an example of the amount of diversity that I'm seeing over this estate. And why is that? So initially we've worked with the estate and trying to understand it based off of the way the wine tastes. So now we're looking at a picture of the vineyard itself, drawn to highlight the grapes, the vineyard blocks. And to set you in this picture, we are looking east. So at the top of the picture is the Vaca Mountain Range. At the bottom is the Napa River. And you can see the Quintessa vineyard planted on the estate, planted and in this picture drawn into 3 different colors. These different colors represent 3 main areas that we've isolated based off of the way the wine tastes. There is the eastern hills of the property, which is along the Silverado Trail. And those are white soils, white volcanic ash. Then there is the center of the property, which we are calling the Central Hills. We have the Central Hill. Actually, I'm sitting right here right now. The Central Hills, the Western Hills, those are the 2 other hill ranges at Quintessa. And those are in red in this picture. They are brown and red soils with mixed volcanics and deep, deep gravel and cobbles. And then finally, at the bottom, we have what we call the benchlands, which is the river bench. So this is the part of the property that's along the Napa River and has the deep river bench. So the first thing that we discovered and I've been working with Quintessa now for 7 years, this is my 7th vintage, is the way generally the way that the wine is tasting coming from these different property or this different part of the properties, these different terroir units. And you can see that in the wine, and we taste the wine together. I'll talk about this again. We have that eastern part of the property, the white volcanic soils. So as I mentioned, Napa Valley these are volcanic mountain ranges. They are what's considered young volcanics. Napa Valley was created about 5 million years ago when, by the combination of the 2 tectonic plates that are hitting outside of California, one subducting under the other, and that causes a kind of a smushing and a folding and a rippling of the earth. At the same time, there is a fault that's unzippering. And where these 3 things meet is what's called a triple junction. This is happening nowhere else on Earth right now. It's called the triple junction. You have the 2 tectonic plates and a fault that's unzippering. It's moving, if my hand is the coast of California, it's moving fairly fast up the western coast of North America. Right now, this triple junction is outside of Washington State. When the triple junction where the triple junction is a period of intense geologic and volcanic activity. So Quintessa is Napa Valley is a volcanic valley, a volcanic terroir with no current active volcanoes, because that volcanism, that white volcanic ash that we see, the volcanic rocks that we see in Napa Valley, were created during that period of time 5 million years ago when the triple junction was passing through Napa Valley. So it's a really interesting it's interesting geology for a wine region because it's very varied, it's young, and a young volcanics means it's very mixed up, and you have so much diversity. So for instance, actually in Napa Valley, we have half of the world's soil series can be found here. And for comparison, I think in France has 4, like all of France has 4 of these the world's soil series, and Napa Valley, just 30 miles, again, north to south, has half of them. So there's an incredible amount of diversity. And this is what we're finding here on Quintessa. With the eastern part of the property, the white volcanic soils are true volcanic ash. So they have their origin in the Vaca Mountain Range, which is behind us. They are exactly like the soils that we'll sometimes find on the top of the mountain range, on Howell Mountain and Pritchard Hill. And for some reason, we're seeing them on the valley floor on this hillside. And what we notice, what I see in the wines that are from this part of the property, how it contributes to the Quintessa character, is in its incredible length. Volcanic wines have electricity and almost grit to them. It has a brightness to the acidity and an incredible length and almost fine chalky finish from the white soils, from the eastern hills of Quintessa. The central hills, so we have a variation in elevation and aspect on the vineyards that are planted on these two hill ranges. They are volcanic and mixed. So what I find in these wines are the tight tannin core. So this is what I would call the core of Quintessa. There's this combination of red and black fruit, typical cassis, real depth to the tannin, and a suppleness, a silkiness to the finish. So this is a more dense mineral, but also silky terroir. And then finally down by the Napa River, so we have two main areas that are volcanic, and then down by the Napa River, we have a deep clay loam. So when I sort of said that Quintessa is this microcosm of Napa Valley, what I mean is that you have parts of the property that are volcanic and mountain terroir, that have the volcanic ashiness, that have obsidian and quartz and rocks, that have elevation, that have kind of that tight and concentrated density to them. And then we also have the experience of the Napa Valley, of the valley floor, of this Napa River influence. So here in the benchlands, we have a deep clay loam. Clay-focused soils create power and density. So this is the part of Quintessa that is typical Rutherford dust. And if you want, I can explain what we talk about when we say Rutherford dust. Really what it is a density, that a plushness, so it's fleshy and soft. It has red fruit character and a distinctive, almost dusty texture in the mouth. And so throughout Quintessa now, we're seeing all of these different characters. But first, we also wanted to know why. Like, it's one thing as a winemaker to observe and to see what kind of wines are coming from the place. But in order to really be able to elevate it even more, it's time to understand why. So what's happening underground? And so with Quintessa, we always have this philosophy of continual investigation, continual study. We believe in the beauty of the Quintessa estate, and we feel like this is, or not feel like it, we know that this is a property that's worthy of a lifetime of study. And we have had our 30 years of growing grapes and working with this property to understand the character that's coming through in the flavor of the wine. But what we see above ground, what we taste, what we're seeing with the vines, if you look at them, watch how they grow, what we're seeing on the surface of the soil and what we're tasting in the wine is only part of the story. In order to really understand it and be able to anticipate what's going to happen, how the seasons are going to be, and to really be able to shepherd these vines into their most highest expression, we need to understand what's happening underground. And so we've embarked upon this really exciting study with some of the most experienced and amazing terroir hunters, I'd call them, I guess, terroirists. So we're working with Dr. Pedro Parra, and he's in this picture here with our vineyard manager, Martin. Dr. Pedro Parra is a PhD in terroir, and he's absolutely amazing. He's got this amazing ability to see a pit. So a pit is a soil pit, what we're sitting in right now in that picture, and to be able to know what the wine is going to taste like just from the way this soil looks, just from the way the terroir looks. And so we've been working with him to further understand Quintessa, to understand the different parts of our property and how we can farm them, make this wine in order to make that most pure and transparent expression, I think, of the beauty of the Quintessa estate. And so we've been working with Pedro to understand those differences. Let me see my next picture. go back here for a second. What we are finding with Pedro is a very interesting story of the formation of Quintessa and how it's even more diverse than we thought. So if we have these 26 different blocks on the property, and I said I sometimes pick in as many as 85 separate picking sections, that those picking sections are based on differences that are underground. And so it's really interesting to find out where those are and to be able to make even better sections of the vineyard and understanding, to realize not only where there's terroir differences, but as we were doing this investigation with Pedro, we were realizing that there's also geologic differences. And in order to fully understand those, so we have, you have wine, then you have terroir, which I think is all of those wine culture connected. Underneath that, underneath the parent of terroir is geology, is why, like where those rocks come from, what's the energy contained in them, how was this formed? And as we were doing some of these pits, we were coming across some really fascinating differences in a couple of blocks. And in discussions with Pedro, he said, I think that there's it's not just different terroirs here that are meeting, it feels like it's actually different geologies. And I am not a geologist and I'm not able to explain why that would be. And he recommended that we work with this really amazing and up and coming geologist, Brenna Quigley, who works in wine. And so Brenna Quigley is here. She is a geologist who has started working in wine and has this really incredible ability to connect the story of a place, so the geologic story of a place, with the terroir in the wine. And we've been working on our investigations with her at Quintessa to further support our understanding of our terroir. And it's been an absolutely fascinating study that is always connected to wine, and it helps us able to understand the diversity and the explanation of this estate. And so these are a couple of the rocks that I've picked off of the property. And I'm kind of going to go through what I found so far about the geologic story of Quintessa and why these rocks are here. As I mentioned, we have the different hill ranges. Well, that eastern hills, those white volcanic soils, that's right here in the center. It's locally called tuff. It's a lot like tufa, but it's not a calcareous rock. It's not limestone, but it's this very airy rhyolitic ash. So it has, in this part of the property on the eastern hills, it's a hill range, pure white soils, very low clay. So these are very difficult soils for the vines to grow in. It's taken a long time. This is probably the most difficult part of the property to understand, and it's taken the longest time for the vines to come into balance with their environment there, and for, frankly, for me as a winemaker to understand the wines coming off of this part of the property. Well, working with Brenna, it turns out that this part of the property was actually formed by a massive landslide off of the Vaca mountain range. So, as I mentioned, these are young volcanic 2 mountain ranges, and they formed when that triple junction was moving. That was a period of a lot of activity, and these mountains were formed very fast. So they pushed up very fast. At one point, it reached such a height and an angle that it couldn't maintain its own weight, the Vaca range. And there was a massive landslide. This was about 3 to 5 million years ago. Massive landslide off of the range that formed the eastern hill of Quintessa. That's why we see this pure white ash on the eastern part of the property. So it's just like the terroir that could be found at the top of the Vaca mountain range, but on the valley floor. Then it also connects to the story of why there's the other hillsides at Quintessa. So what happened when this landslide off of the mountain formed the eastern hills is that it was so energetic, so active, and so much pressure that the earth behind it needed to act like water. And so the earth actually just rippled up, and the rippling is what created the central and western hills of Quintessa. And in these hills, we find the other rocks. These are all volcanic rocks around here that are found in the central hills and the eastern hills. So we find a mixture of some of this volcanic ash, a chert, which is the quartz that has a high iron content, obsidian, which is volcanic glass. And I also am finding here, as we dig bigger pits, we're finding also cobbles and gravels. And working with Brenna and with Pedro, discovered that this is a volcanic terroir, but also has an old alluvium. So these cobbles and gravels that we're finding, they are contributing the alluvium, which is earth that was moved by water, creates more clay. So this is a slightly richer soil. So that explains the suppleness, the power, and the density that I'm finding in this part of the property. And combined with the volcanic grit, so that mineral character, the red soils, the high iron content, getting that minerality, the graphite notes, that strength to the tannin. That is from the volcanics and the alluvium mixed, plus the elevation in this part of the property. And then finally, the Napa River influences our western part of the Quintessa property, giving us that deep clay, silty loam, creating that kind of typical Napa Valley character. So, if you can't tell, I get very fascinated about this, because what it allows us to do is to farm with a intuition about how the grapes are going to grow. So instead of just waiting and observing, we are able to understand what's happening underground so that we can better shepherd the Quintessa wines through and continue to improve and to have a pure expression of the estate every year. And that brings me to our farming practices. Quintessa is founded by, as I mentioned, these absolutely visionary people, Augustine and Valeria Huneeus. When Valeria found Quintessa, it had never been planted. And she is a person who has very deep feelings, very deep connections to the spiritual world. And she immediately knew that the place had a soul and had the potential to be a great wine estate. But she also knew that she did not want to leave it worse than she found it. She actually wanted to leave it better than she found it. So since the very beginning, since the very first vine was planted at Quintessa, we have been an organic farm. So we are a certified organic vineyard, utilizing only cover crops and compost for our fertility. We have never cut any trees down in the development of the property. So we have all of the native oak woodlands that were here when Augustine and Valeria walked onto the property are still here. And in 1996, Valeria got introduced to biodynamic farming practices as well. And we began to practice with biodynamics, and now we're also we're organic and a biodynamic farm. What this means is it's a philosophy of farming that asks you to think about the connection of the mineral, plant, animal, and cosmos. And so it's important to be not just a grape farm, but to have more diversity, to what we call close the loop. So try and not bring in outside inputs and instead utilize just what's here on the estate. And we have animals on the estate to help us with that. We have cows and sheep and chickens and bees. And we work mainly with soil health. So, I mean, if anyone has any questions about organic and biodynamic farming, I'm here to answer them. But I think the most important thing to remember is that it is about creating health and diversity in the microbiome. So healthy soils allow vines to be healthy, and a healthy vine is a balanced vine. And a balanced vine is better able to express its place. It is better able to fight off pests and diseases, without us coming in with synthetic chemicals and pesticides and anything like that. So it's about creating resilience and balance in the vines. And I think that this has always been an important thing in creating healthy vines and great wines. Now, as we are experiencing even more rapidly climate changing and more extreme seasons, I actually think that biodynamics and healthy, resilient, adaptive vines are going to be the way that we're going to manage climate change. Is the way that we're going to allow the vines to adapt and to be able to see and respond to what are honestly really changing seasons. The cycles here are changing. And the seasons that we could count on 30, 40 years ago in Napa Valley are not as common anymore. And so how do we adapt as people? How do the vines adapt? With biodynamics, we believe that we adapt by observing and allowing adaptation to happen. And these kind of philosophies, they pervade everything we do at Quintessa. This is a picture of us, our team, at sunrise. So actually that's what it's going to look like here in about an hour and a half. And sitting in what we call our spiritual place. When Augustine and Valeria founded Quintessa, they knew it would be an estate, but they thought really hard about everything, about this is a recurring theme. We always think a lot about everything we do here at Quintessa. There's a lot of meaning behind everything we do, and hopefully you see that kind of depth and meaning in the wines. But they thought about what makes a great wine estate. And they found that in the world, there's 5 factors for everyone. There's, of course, a vineyard. There's a winery. There's a residence, needs to be somebody's home. There is a hospitality center, and there's a spiritual place. And in Europe, that spiritual place tends to be a chapel on the property. Here at Quintessa, we instead have created our spiritual place. And it's actually the reason for the name Quintessa, which comes from the Latin for the quinta essentia, or the 5th element. So there's a lot of mention of 5 here. We have those 5 factors that are important for every great wine estate. And then there's also in alchemy, there's 5 elements. You have earth, air, water, fire. And then the 5th element is called the quinta essentia. And that is the soul, or the spirit. And so that is how Quintessa was named. It's named to be the expression of the soul, of the quinta essentia of this incredible estate. And in the winery as well, the same philosophy flows through. So it flows from how we grow the vines, how we understand the place, how we make the wine. This is the winery. This is where actually I'm sitting right now. It is built into the hillside in order to not disturb the natural beauty of the Quintessa estate, and has this iconic rock wall that mimics the curve of the hillside above it. It is a gravity flow winery. So the roof of the winery is the crush pad, and actually our hospitality center is above that as well. So when we're able to travel again, I welcome you guys to come here. And underneath the ceiling of the crush pad is the winery. And this is a custom design winery. I had the ability to do a little bit of a redesign in time for the 2018 vintage to better match the winery with what we're understanding about our estate. It's really powerful to have an estate winery because it is designed specifically for the vineyard. You're able to actually make those connections even tighter. And through my understanding of the way the Quintessa wine is growing, particularly those eastern hills that I was mentioning with that white soil that have that length and almost fine chalkiness, I have believed that concrete fermenters are really important to translate that grape, that character, into the wine. And so as you see here on our right-hand side, we have a whole bank of custom designed concrete fermenters at Quintessa that are utilized to allow that white soil to come to some body and suppleness. They're a really good match for native fermentations. I don't add any yeast or bacteria. Also using stainless steel fermenters and a bit, what you can't see in this picture is a bit of wood as well. So 3 different types of fermentation vessels matched to the character of the grapes that are coming off of the estate. The winemaking process is fairly simple. I just want to be as pure and as clear as possible. So I don't add acid or tannin or bacteria or yeast. I just allow the fermentation to happen, do pump overs, and I will drain and press based off of taste. And then the wine goes into our caves, into French oak barrels, to age for 2 years and to develop for 2 years while we decide on the blend and to come to understand of these wines. So over the course of 2 years, as it's sitting in the caves and resting, we're going through multiple tastings. And I am very lucky to be joined by Michel Roland on the blending. He's a master blender, and he's been working with Quintessa since 2000. And you know, I've actually worked with Michel at many places in my career, and he's an amazing blender and taster, and it's so fun to meet up and to be able to taste through these wines and to reassemble. So if the process that I was talking about of understanding the differences, the minute differences of the different parts of the vineyard, picking things separately, treating them differently in the winery, the blending process is the process of bringing that all back together to represent the entirety of the Quintessa estate. And so we work on that to create a wine that speaks to all of the different terroir units, all of those different characters of the Quintessa estate in one wine. And I think actually at this point, I mean, it's probably time to taste some wine. I'm sorry if you haven't already. I'm going to stop the share. We have 4 wines to share with you. And I think we should start with Illumination, which is our white wine. So I was talking a lot about Quintessa estate, and that's the Quintessa estate is the source of Quintessa entirely. Illumination is the white wine from Quintessa. So this is our partner to Quintessa. The core of Illumination is from the Quintessa estate, from a vineyard block that is close to the lake. So it's in a lower elevation, cooler site with a bit more clay because there was a stream that came through it. Illumination is, I mean, it's one of my favorite wines to drink, and I actually should have poured, even though it is 5 in the morning, I should have poured myself a glass. I might after this. It is a complex and unique white wine. So this is a Sauvignon Blanc, but it is not just Sauvignon Blanc. There's 2 types of Sauvignon Blanc in there, and there's also Semillon. So Sauvignon Blanc is the bright citrus character. So that typical Sauvignon Blanc notes, really bright acidity, citrus, pithiness, grapefruit. There's a variation on Sauvignon Blanc that's called Sauvignon Musqué. Up until, I think it was I was actually already working in the 1990s. We thought that Sauvignon Musqué was a different variety. There was a lot of sort of different kind of fighting about it, but through DNA testing, it's proven that Sauvignon Musqué is Sauvignon Blanc. It's just a variation, but it's more perfumed. So you get this almost tropical character, a honeysuckle floral. Oh, I see the grape varieties. It's not Merlot. It's Sauvignon Blanc and Sauvignon Musqué. So it's about 85% Sauvignon Blanc. Half of that is Sauvignon Blanc, half of that is Sauvignon Musqué, and then 15% Semillon. And so Semillon brings the weight, the gravitas, the body, and the ageability of Illumination. Illumination is a blend, not just of these varieties, but also of different fermentation vessels. It's all barrel fermented. That's where you get that richness, that body. And I use different fermentation vessels to create a little different character, to highlight character of the vine, of the grapes themselves. So concrete eggs highlight minerality. So they accentuate the minerality in the Sauvignon Blanc. A little bit of new French oak barrels. for that spice, that tannin. It's about 4%. About 4% French acacia wood barrels. That's a very tight grain, slow growing wood that doesn't have tannin like oak, but has a floral characteristic and kind of highlights, I don't know, what I call the sort of sharp edges of Sauvignon Blanc. I think Sauvignon Blanc should be mouth watering. Neutral oak to just allow the character of the vines themselves, the wine itself to show through, and then some stainless steel barrels as well. So you get that linear acidity. And, you know, it takes a lot to be a worthy partner to Quintessa, but I think that Illumination is doing that. Do you guys have any questions about the white wine?
Okay, there's a question from Michelle Quick, and she asks, is there a reason why Sauvignon Blanc Semillon was chosen to be planted instead of Chardonnay?
Yes, so, you know, so I think Sauvignon Blanc is exceptionally suited to parts of Napa Valley. Chardonnay has we're a little bit too warm, in fact, for some Chardonnay. It tends to get a little flabby over here in our climate, and we have a more kind of mineral terroir, which lends itself better to the Sauvignon Blanc grape. And so that's why we chose to plant Sauvignon Blanc, to be that partner to Quintessa. Also, and this might be a controversial statement, I think that Sauvignon Blanc is one of the great wines of the world because it has the ability to be transparent to terroir, that it can make beautiful wines in different areas, but that it speaks to where it's from. And I hope this, and Chardonnay tends to speak to how it's made.
Like when you say how it's made, it means like it's more a wine made in the winery than the vineyard.
I think that it's very hard. Chardonnay is a little too it shows too much of the winemaker's hand, or its potential to show too much of the winemaker's hand and to obscure the actual terroir, where Sauvignon Blanc has the ability to really express terroir and to be different in different places. I guess I have to make a controversial statement every time, like I give a seminar, and that'll be my one for this one. And why, you know, if it's what I would consider too warm for Chardonnay, not for Sauvignon Blanc. Sauvignon Blanc has thicker skins than Chardonnay and in a looser cluster structure. And so it can ripen in a short season, which is really nice. We'll usually pick it in August. But it does need some warmth to ripen, to not have just those kind of really grassy characters, but it responds really well to the cold nights here and maintains that acidity. And so, like I said, I've planted it down by the lake. So I'm planting it in the coolest part of this property. So a cooler part of a warm region. So you get that California sunshine, which I think you have in the Illumination, which is the peach characteristics, that little bit of peach, a little bit of guava. There's this bright fruit. That is California sunshine. But maintaining that acidity and minerality, because we're planting it in a cooler area of a warmer region, if that makes sense. So it's kind of got that both. And this is in a very unique style. It's a blend like a white Bordeaux. It's ageable. I recently just had the 2007 Illumination. As it ages that far, it becomes a different wine, but this is a very ageable wine. And but it has that acidity, that it has the body. It's barrel fermented, those different barrels. We have this compelling texture. I think that that's what's so special about and unique about Illumination, is that textural component. But because it's Sauvignon Blanc, it maintains this beautiful acidity, and it allows the wine to be very flexible in a food pairing. So it's ageable and very flexible. It has the body. You could put it on the table with some heavier foods, but because of the acidity, it always makes you want to have another bite of food and another sip of wine.
Okay, another question coming from Dr. Richard Chen. And the question is, How many acres are planted with Sauvignon Blanc, and what is the annual production?
So we have at the Quintessa estate 2 acres of Sauvignon Blanc. And we are also, for Illumination, working with a partner vineyard in the Bennett Valley of Sonoma and another vineyard in southern Napa Valley. So Illumination is not 100% estate. We're working with some different vineyards, and the production is very small. We're about 2,000 cases. And Diego can answer how much. There's only a little bit that goes farther out than California.
Yeah, it's only 300 cases that we are exporting of the Illumination, so it's very, very limited.
And so I thought for Quintessa, we have 3 vintages of Quintessa, correct? And I thought that we could go from, well, actually we could go either way, youngest to oldest or oldest to youngest. I think that you guys have set up to go oldest to youngest, is that correct?
Yes, correct.
Okay, perfect. So then our first vintage is the 2010. And so I think this is really great to have multiple vintages. Because when you're making one wine from the estate and you have what I would consider a soul, a character of the estate that shows through every year, the best way to see it and the best way to understand it is to taste multiple vintages, to see how the wine not only ages, but how it expresses itself in different vintages. Some people have said that Napa doesn't have vintage variation. I strongly disagree with that statement, and I think you will too after tasting these 3 wines. 2010, it's always been one of my favorite vintages. I love this wine. It was a cooler year for Napa Valley, actually, and we had great acidity in the wines. The wines, when they were very young, were very bright, very acid, very tight. And as it's aged now for 10 years, it has come into, still has the primary fruit aromas, but has the secondary development as well, which I love. You have the black fruit. So this like ripe but not overripe, the cassis, the blackberry, the black fruit. The character of our surrounding environment here is full of bay leaf, so bay laurel, sagebrush. There's this kind of smell of chaparral forests. And I see that in this wine. You're getting that herbal component and the minerality. So as you taste the 2010 and taste all of the vintages of Quintessa, think about what I said about the different soil types and what they are contributing. You have noticed the incredible length of the wine and the way, especially at the finish, there is this texture of almost fine chalk. That's from those white soils, that length and that chalkiness. Then there is the kind of supple fruit and supple tannin. And what I mean by supple tannin is that when you smell the wine and you smell the fruit, and then you taste the wine, the very end, there's this reminder of the fruit itself. And there's this, this gripping, but also suppleness to the tannin. So it kind of, it's the way it feels in your mouth. That's from the Central Hills. The minerality that you're going to notice, and I think especially in the next vintage, we notice the minerality, that graphite, iron, whetstone, kind of like rock, hot red rocks, is from the Western Hills of Quintessa that have a red soil and a higher iron content. And then more when we taste the younger vintages, there's the influence of the bench. These volcanic parts of the property allow for the ageability. That's that core tannin, that structure. But what is so cool, and what we're going to taste as we taste, you're going to taste some pretty young wine, the 2018, is that Quintessa is also drinkable young. And I attribute that to the influence of the Napa River, to those bench blocks, that they add the flesh. If there's like the skeleton, the sinew from the volcanic parts of the property, the fleshiness is, and the plushness is from the bench blocks. So do you guys have any comments about 2010? It's one of my favorite vintages. Like, it's only 10 years old. I think it has lots of life ahead of it, but I really love where it's drinking right now. I love the way it combines the fruit, the fresh fruit, but they're starting to develop. So you're getting these almost tea leaf characters, the minerality, the savory notes, and just the full integration in the mouth, and still holding that 2010, that really bright acidity.
Yeah, I think whatever that you mentioned about that tea leaf notes and that strong cassis note is very much evident in the 2010. And I think what is very interesting is like how you're going to bring us through the few different vintages and the strength of each vintage, whether it's highlighting the minerality, be it because of the vintage, because of the aging of it. I think that is more interesting. Moving on to the next two vintages that have a comparison. Yeah, but now that 2010, having that introduction to Quintessa, having the introductions on what you mentioned about the fleshiness, the white chalk, the texture of the white chalk. Yeah, the 2010 is a very good opening, yeah, to how the Quintessas should be like.
Yeah. Well, let's try the 2016.
Before we proceed to the 2016, let me just read the comment of Mimi from Epicure Magazine. And then she says, the 2010 is beautiful, lovely texture and fruit savory play.
Oh, thank you. Very nice words.
Yes. Okay, now we can proceed to the 2016.
2016. So this is another favorite vintage of mine. 2016 was a very even year. So it was the kind of season where we didn't have frost, we didn't have heat waves. Typically in Napa Valley, sort of a typical Napa Valley vintage, we can define it by the heat wave. We almost always get a heat wave around the beginning of September, end of August, beginning of September. And the extreme of our heat and the amount of our heat is often what defines vintages. 2016, so 2000, as I called 2010 a cooler vintage, 2016 was just kind of average, actually. And it was sort of noticeable by its lack of anything to notice. There was no frost, there was no heat waves. It was an absolutely beautiful growing season. And it was very full canopies, even crop, and very, I don't know how else to describe it, energetic. So I've always thought of the 2016 for me as energetic. I love where it is right now, where it is showing the savory side of Quintessa. So you have the those kind of notes, the typical fruit notes. It's still very young wine, but you're really starting to see the bay laurel, the kind of dried thyme, tarragon, spicy, herbal, dried leaf kind of notes that I love in this wine. And it's adding a whole level of complexity for me. And it's a really good comparison to 2010, I think, as well. So we have 5 red varieties that we grow on the estate: Cabernet Sauvignon, Cabernet Franc, Merlot, Petit Verdot, and Carmenere. So Carmenere, the lost 6th Bordeaux variety. And as I mentioned, the family is from Chile. They were able to bring the Carmenere over themselves from Chile, from 2 of the oldest and best known Carmenere vineyards. And I think that Quintessa is the only Napa wine with a Carmenere component. Though I do see we have what we call a grape crush report, where all of our whatever we've harvested is reported to the government and then shared in a big report. And so somebody else has an acre of Carmenere, but I don't know who it is here in Napa. So I can still sort of say that Quintessa is the only one, but it adds that Carmenere brings a spice component to this wine. So you have Cabernet Sauvignon as the base. Of course, it's about 80% of our 85% of our planting. Cassis, tannin, body, Cabernet Franc being a little bit more rustic, structural, red fruit, that herbal character. Petit Verdot is incensey spice. Merlot is the plushness. Carmenere is the this tobacco leaf character, this herbal note. I grew up on the eastern part of the United States, where in some areas where they would grow tobacco, and there's a particular smell of a tobacco barn. Or if anyone here has ever, is a cigar smoker, it's the smell of a cigar leaf wrapper. It's not cut tobacco, it's more resinous, almost like incense or, those old fashioned, the solid ink stones that you add water to and then you paint with, that kind of inky smell. I smell that. I see that coming out a lot in the 2016.
Okay, so let me just read some of the comments. The comment is coming from Sue Ann, and she says, to me, 2016, plum, mocha, and floral. 2010, herbaceous, dusty, savory, spicy, a sense of autumn. And another comment coming from Purple of Resorts World Sentosa, and she says, I prefer 2016 compared to all three reds. It is lovely, well balanced compared to 2010 and aromatic.
No, thank you.
We have a lot of poets in this session, by the way.
Have a lot of what?
Poets.
Yeah, I know. I'm like, sense of autumn. I was like, gonna write that down. If you see that in tasting notes, don't call me out on it. I'm totally gonna use that. Love that.
Singapore is giving you a lot of descriptive words.
It's beautiful. Well, 2016 is, it's harmonious. Like the wine is so seamless. That's one of the things that I've always loved so much about this vintage is that it just came together. Like the blend just came together, the wine just came together. And for me, it's a 2018, if you want to taste that's our next wine, right? Our youngest wine. You want to taste that because there's a lot of similarities between 2018 and 2016. 2018, of course, is a baby. We just released it. I think it's tasting pretty nice already, though. Like 2016, it was a year that was fairly even. 2018, though, has a little more tannin, a little more, kind of everything's tuned up just a little bit more than in 16. I think that there's a beautiful precision in 18, and it kind of represents, I hope actually all of these wines sort of it represents the future of Quintessa. So you're seeing this kind of baby wine. And as I mentioned with the different parts of the estate, I think when the wine is younger, you see more influence of the Napa River, influence of that clay soil, because it's giving you that fleshiness.
Okay, so there's another comment coming from the master of wine himself, Mr. Tan Ying Sin, and he says, the 2018 appears to have the lowest proportion of new oak, 62%, compared to the previous vintages, and especially the vintages pre-2015, where the proportion was usually about 85%. Is there a philosophical change on the use of new oak, or are factors in play here?
There is a change, and it is on purpose. So the first vintage that I made for Quintessa from soil to glass is 2015, and I have started to lower the new oak percentage for a couple of reasons. One is that I feel that about 60% of our vineyard is what we call the patrimonial vines, the original plantings from 1990, and they are 30 years old now. Which is actually considered really old for Napa. We're going to keep them in the ground and hopefully hit 50 or plus years old and really change that paradigm. But as the vines have gotten older, I feel like they have the depth themselves. They don't need as much support from wood. And I, in fact, don't want to put makeup on this wine. I want to show clearly the expression of the terroir and have oak, the barrels, be a supporting actor. So like salt in food, it's going to lift up the flavors, but not put makeup over the whole thing. And so I have lowered the percentage of new oak from about 85% to 60 to 70%. So the difference between 60 and 70 sometimes is just a vintage. is some of that is like those outside factors you were mentioning with vintage variation or just how the blend comes together. But the larger trend of moving down is purposeful, because I want the wine and the fruit to show through. And I feel like there's plenty of tannin, plenty of structure there in the oak tannin itself. I mean, in the grape tannin itself. But I'm not going to go lower than 60%. So still in the world of wine, I guess we're still pretty high.
Okay, Mr. Tan has an answer and he says, thank you. Personally, I think it's a move in the right direction. The wine shows more clarity, texture, and complexity.
Thank you. Yeah, I need this transcript. I love your notes. I love all these comments. And I think the 2018 is really fun. It is so young. But just imagine what that wine's going to be like in 20 years. And I think it's got such precision and purity to it that it's exciting.
I think over here, what I'm enjoying over the three wines is the characteristics of all three different vintages so unique. Yeah, and this is probably the first time where I've got that clarity, so much clarity, yeah, that's been able to show in the vertical tasting. Sometimes, you know, when you go through different vertical tastings, be it Bordeaux wines, be it Burgundies, be it Americans, you know, you might have subtlety between the different vintages, but this is one tasting which it's just pretty evident to me that different characteristics, yeah, of the different vintages. Do you think it amounts to what you shared with us that that terroir base, the alluvium, the how each growing season is able to accentuate the eastern hills, the bench, and the what's the one in center? Western.
The central hills, like
the central hills, yeah, the centrals, yeah. So is it something which you feel that the different growing years is able to accentuate each?
I think that's exactly right. That is the difficulty and the power of having a diverse estate. So the difficulty is it's complicated. It's typical Napa Valley single vineyard vineyards are pretty uniform, pretty flat, pretty uniform. And Quintessa is anything but that. But the real power is one that you can make a complex and layered wine from a single estate, so that there's different layers of flavor. There's, as the wine ages and in different vintages, different characters are going to show through. But also in the way that the different parts of the property show in different years. And so if we have, for instance, say we have a very warm year, well, the more exposed parts of the property, so the warmer parts of the property might suffer, but the cooler parts of the property are going to be great. And then, vice versa might happen in a cooler year. And so you have that variation. And then with a philosophy of making a wine that expresses the estate. My winemaking philosophy is basically to try and listen to the vineyard, to observe, and it sounds easy, but it's actually not, is to try and take yourself and your intentions and your ego out of it, and let the grapes, let the wine be what, it wants to be. Of course, you have to make decisions, and it's kind of, you're making decisions, you're trying to listen to it, but you're interpreting. But having that philosophy, I think, lends itself better to showing vintage variation and to character of the vineyard, because you are watching the whole year and trying to understand what the vintage is going to be, what the wine is going to be, and then allowing that to happen, changing your winemaking techniques to support that. And being able to identify differences in vintage can be as simple as, one of the things I'll do is look at the number of seeds per berry can be different year over year, based off of the conditions of the year. And the number of seeds per berry and berry size will tell you before you've even started picking if this has got the potential to be a very strong and tannin driven year or a softer and more gentle year. So, those are like revealing the curtain. That's some of the things that you do as a winemaker to understand, to listen, to understand what the vines want to be. Yeah.
What is your first vintage in the winery?
In Quintessa,
Yeah,
is 2015 here. So I came right after, so I finished the 2013 and 14, but 15 was my first vintage here. Grapes to glass. I've been in Napa Valley since 2003, making wine at different estates and wineries across Napa Valley. And it's just it's absolute joy. And I feel so honored to be at Quintessa because this is a dream to work with, to be a part of something like this, to be part of an estate that's this beautiful, that has this kind of voice, that has the ability to make, I think, a wine that is distinctive and unique in a pretty special region. So.
thank you. I don't. Do we have any other questions from the floor?
None so far, but you can actually drop your questions now.
Yeah, I guess for me is you've gave us a very good understanding of Quintessa, the different plots and so on. And for me, it's always amazing to speak to a winemaker who has that, whether you call it opportunities or you call it challenges, to to vinify wine with different plots. Yeah, because to me that's a challenge, because you have to know the characteristic. And like you say, the terroir is not just the surface. The terroir is deep down in the soil as well. And you have 26 different plots and up to 85 separate picking seasons. Yeah. And you have to know the plots that how the water drainage, how the amount of sunshine, how the growth, the speed of every single vine is, in order to actually grasp when do you want to pick the wine, how you want to taste, the amount of acidity. And I'm sure you've got technology to help you, but I think it's really that experience and that nuances of a winemaker that's able to pick out when you want to do what. And I think, to me, I don't know whether that's a blessing or that's a challenge.
It keeps it interesting.
Yeah.
No, and I mean, you hit on a right point. It's that, like, when you're talking about how to understand the property, it's not just about harvest and just walking through and tasting grapes. I'm working with an absolutely incredible team. Martin Galvan, our vineyard manager, has been with Quintessa for 20 years, and he lives on the property. I mean, he knows every vine. It's incredible. And we work together, and we walk, I bring my dogs to work and I walk the vineyard year round. So I can see in the wintertime is actually sometimes where you can see best the differences, because you can see where the water is flowing and where it's drying out first. And then you start to remember that. And then when you're walking through tasting grapes, you're like, yes, you can see it. And so it's about, and I think that's the power of, this kind of estate idea, is that you're connected to a state. Wine, I think, wine is special. It connects to a place, and then it also travels. And so a place like Quintessa that has, I hope that you guys can come visit and come walk here, because it's just absolutely beautiful. But more than that, you feel something when you're here. And that feeling, that something, is what we're trying to share in the wine.
Okay, so we have another question, and the question is coming from Derek. And the question is, the 2018 for me brings power combined with elegance. Do you think this is also a vintage characteristic?
I think that the vintage itself has this combination of power and harmony, but that is also, making the blend, when I'm taking the wine, I kind of like repeat 3 words in my head, and that's like, it's elegance, harmony, power. I guess more words I think about layers or complexity, but those are the things that I think that Quintessa is, and we should have in every year. A certain amount of power, that is just inherent to our terroir. There's going to be power, there's going to be some tannin. 2018, I think, has a little bit more. It was always a more forward vintage.
Thank you, Rebekah. Well, before I finish the session, just want to ask you that question, like, what's happening at the vineyard now? What is the new things? What are the new things? And what is the exciting things? Yes.
Okay, so we're winding down the 2021 harvest. So we've harvested the entire estate and all the wine is in tank fermenting. And so we're really busy with fermentations and pressing off and going to barrel. And I am continuing to work with concrete fermenters, and I really am loving those and how they're developing. And I am also just started experimenting with clay amphora. So first is
yes.
From Italy. So I got some amphora from Tuscany, from a Etruscan area, an area that's really well known for their terracotta, for their ceramics, and imported some amphora. And I'm working with those to see if that is a good match as an aging vessel, maybe eventually as a fermentation vessel, but first as an aging vessel for the different parts of our property. So that's one of the exciting things, or one of the things I'm most excited about this year.
And that's going to happen to the 2021 vintage?
Yes. 2021.
Can't wait to see that. Can't wait to see that.
Yes. So first you'll get the 19 and the 20. So 19 vintage is in bottle. We age for 2 years in barrel and then 1 year in bottle before release.
Well, we've tasted 2 wines of your vintage, so I'm sure we're in good hands. Yeah, we can't. Well, I think I like to run up the session if we don't have any more questions. Okay, so thank you very much, Rebekah. Thank you very much for waking so early in the morning to address us. Yeah, so when the airspace is open, we welcome you to Singapore. You don't need to wake up so early to have a dinner with us. Yeah, and I'm sure we can't wait to visit you in Napa. Thank you, Diego. Thank you very much for making this happen for all of us. Yeah, so goodbye, guys. Thank you very much again.
Thank you,
Thank you, everyone. Thank you guys so much.
Thank you for your time.
Bye.
Bye-bye.